Just figure I'd do a real quick update on what I've managed to get done so far. Well, for starters, you're not going to be able to see that. See if I can sort of like this. Yeah, the fuel rail is gone. That's why you see these. These are just the injectors. The fuel rail used to occupy this whole location, if you remember. The only way to get that out, you really have to cut these, just slice them. These, you can't trust these hoses; they're too old anyway. And there is a way to remove the hose and even use that little retaining ferrule down there. Here, let me get this out of the way. Show it up right in here. I'll talk about that later. That's gone. I pulled the thermostat housing, gone. It's still hanging on here. I'm trying to leave everything as hooked up as possible. That this will just stay attached through these hoses and such to the intake manifold when I take off. There's no reason to take all that apart. And it helps me with the routing of all the hoses and stuff. I got this part here. Again, this will just stay attached to the intake. There's no reason to disconnect it. I might go ahead and make some notes about which one of these tubes are going where, because this thing's got a lot of tubes on it for the, I presume, for the turbo management and or emission controls. But, you know, there's a lot of things that can just stay attached. And when the manifold comes off, I will have to disconnect, at the very least, the PVC pipe, because that connects up to the engine block. So I'll probably break it, right, whichever one's easier to get at. It looks like it might be this one, might be easier to get to. I put a rag in a turbo outlet just so nothing drops down there. I need a bolt going down in there. The other big accomplishment is you have to disconnect the EGR pipe. It comes from the exhaust through the EGR valve, basically tying the intake manifold to the exhaust manifold, which would be a real pain in the rear. So I got this out the other day. This usually gives a lot of people trouble, this particular bolt. The way you defeat that is this stuff, that stuff, and my BFW here. Bravo Whiskey, Bravo Foxtrot Whiskey here, okay? Big crescent wrench. That way you can really put some torque on it. That came off without a problem once we go that route. So EGR's off. It looks like I have to kind of watch this oil line here is tied to the intake manifold, so clearly I'll have to be working on getting this disconnected from that, so that won't be a hang up. That's pretty much it. The bolts to take the manifolds off are located back in here. I don't know if there's gonna be enough light to pick this up. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think they're 14s that go to the clamp on the intake manifold to the block. And then there's, I'm not gonna be able to show you these, but there's bolts that go into the block and basically clamp. I'm just missing one here, but it's basically on this plane here. There's a bolt that hooks up for the exhaust, so you have to go through, and you can actually get a long socket, a 12 mil with an extension, maybe put a wobble socket on it and get in there without removing the heat shield. A lot of folks like to remove the heat shield to get better exposure. Okay, that's the heat shield right up in there, but that's really hard to get at, and a lot of times these little bolts will break, so there's really no reason to take it off. You can remove those bolts that hold the manifold on without removing the heat shield. I've done it. It's not that big a deal. And let's see, is there anything else? Oh, you gotta be careful of a few things of note. One is, you'll notice I left that bolt in right there. I'm going to secure that to the thermostat, but my point being is this particular bolt, if you don't know this, is a special length right here that clamps the thermostat housing on. You don't just replace this with a generic bolt that's about the same size. It has to be the exact same size, because it has just enough threads to fully engage the head here. But it's a through hole. It's a through hole, so if you go too far, it'll actually impinge on the timing guide, the timing chain guide, pushing the timing guide into the chain. Bad. You don't want to do that. The timing chain is not supposed. The guide's not supposed to push into the chain. The chain's supposed to ride smoothly on top of it. So don't lose this bolt. You know, keep up with that. The only other thing you have to kind of watch out for is I removed one bolt here for this. I wanted to see if this was broken. Fortunately, it's not. That's the outside stud on the exhaust manifold. First of all, the bolt came off easily, which is a good sign. Hopefully, they'll all come off easily. Second of all, this stud was not broken, which is another good thing, because usually this one breaks, and this one always breaks. It's its partner in crime. So the fact that this one wasn't broken gives me hope that maybe the rest will be okay, not too hard to get at. But, you know, if it is, you just have to do the same thing. You have to drill it out and tap it, or try to weld onto it and pull it out. But where I was going with this is it's important to note the orientation of the washer that holds it on. This is the washer. I always get this confused, concave and convex. I think concave is when it kind of dips in the inside, and convex, I think, is where it kind of is rounded on the top. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to be able to get a good enough picture. It's kind of rounded on the top here. In other words, it's shaped like it's kind of bent like that. That part where it's bent out goes out. So in other words, you want to have the kind of indented part pressing up against the manifold. You don't want to flip this over and put it in like that. You want to put it in like that. Remember, you basically want the edges of the washer to be catching the intake and exhaust manifold. You don't want the inside to kind of be pulling in on it. You want the edges. So the way you get the edges are, the edges extend out lower on the part that's curved like this. Okay? So anyway, that's important to remember. Just kind of keep up with that, and you're good to go. Oh, there's one other little interesting thing about these engines to the ZX. It has this little funny little plate. You got to remove this plate. It's kind of bolted on top of the intake manifold right down this area here. You see where it's kind of clean. That exposes one exhaust nut that you may not otherwise notice. Some of the earlier Zs didn't have that. They have a different kind of head altogether. This is a webbed head. The earlier ones do not have any webbing. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll be having to test all these diaphragms, obviously, to see if they're blown out. I did check to see if this thing here was loose. I want to make sure this part here wasn't jammed. This is some kind of wastegate, I presume, for the turbo. So, and it's not. Kind of a funny sound, which is probably good. That probably means it's that this thing here is pumping gas, you know, in and out as it's going back and forth. But should be able to pull a vacuum on that and see if that works. Again, I don't know if I'm going to even keep this turbo. If this is a fairly generic fitment turbo, i.e., I think it's called a T3. They have T3, T4 hybrids, which I think it means a T3 turbine and a T4 compressor, a slightly larger compressor. You know, maybe do that, because it seems like it's easier to get those than it gets just a straight T3. All right, they make T3, T4s. I guess a T3, T4 is an upgrade, makes more pressure at lower RPM, which I'm not necessarily looking for here, because if I'm running the standard EFI system, those are very non-computerized. In other words, they don't have a lot of ways of monitoring everything. They pretty much rely on things being a particular exact specification. So I don't know if that'd be a good idea to try to run the stock electronics with a change in the turbo performance. So I have to think about that a little bit. And like I said, I don't even know the status of the turbo. I didn't bother to pull this off and try to spin it, see how much free play there is in the shaft. I assume there'll be some, being that it uses a plain bearing instead of a ball bearing. So you have to have a little bit of play just for the oil to get in there and lubricate around in other words, it runs on a cushion of oil around that bearing. So if there's no oil there, because it hasn't run any, or hasn't any pressure in forever, then I would expect there to be a tiny bit of radial play. How much? I don't know. I'm not a turbo guy, so this is the first time I ever flew one of these. I have no idea. But just from general knowledge about how bearings work, I could accept that there would be a tiny bit of play in a plain bearing. That is a bearing that it relies strictly on a film of oil to provide the bearing, to keep the parts separated so they don't come to contact and weld each other together. So I have to work on that some. But yes, but today's goal, and I'll try to get some of it on video. I'll set up the stand later and pull the engine out in better accessibility. Is going to be to unbolt those bolts that hold the exhaust and intake manifold on and pull that off. Like I said, I don't know how much of that I'll be able to get on video because it might take me forever to get one bolt, and that'd be a really boring video. Yeah. But anyway, if I get that off, then we should have a pretty clean engine. I mean, there's not a whole lot left. Once you get that bolt off, I mean, there's spark plugs on the other side, and I got a few things to deal with, like the oil lines and whatnot. But the thing I want to do then is, stuff some stuff into the intake and exhaust ports, cover it with some tape, get it really sealed up well, tighten the valve cover back on, just finger tight, and then pressure wash this thing and see what I can do about cleaning up some of the grime. Because every time I come out here and work on this, it's just a real show as far as dirt, Okay, this is a F54 block, by the way. I didn't know what that was before. And I think it's a P90 head. I'm not going to flip it over to see, but I did look and see it does have the hydraulic lifters in it. I wasn't sure about that, if the turbos only had the hydraulic lifters, or if there was a mechanical adjust lifter on a turbo head or not. I think they might have had both at some point in time. I think there's a P90 and a P90A. I'm not 100% sure about that. I mean, I'm okay with the hydraulic lifters. Hey, that's one less maintenance item as long as they work, and I assume they will work. If they don't, I'm guessing that you could replace them with mechanical lifters. You just unscrew the big nut. I think that's like a 22 mil nut. I think that attaches the whole lifter assembly to the head. If I have to go that route, I will, but I actually prefer hydraulic lifters because the idea of not having to adjust the valve, that's the one maintenance thing that you have to do with an L28 engine or L26 or L24. A lot of those early engines back then, they all had mechanical lifters, which meant you had to periodically go in there and adjust the valve lash. And if you don't do that, bad things can happen. Eventually, generally what happens is the valves tighten up over time as they beat themselves into the seat. There's less gap on the top of the valve, and eventually you'll get to a point where your valves are not fully seating. And when that happens, you start having, especially on the exhaust side, you'll have exhaust gases trying to get by the edges of the valve, and the edges are not contacting the seat, so there's no heat dissipation. The valve gets hot and you burn the valves. So always have to adjust them, and I look at my valves probably every, I don't know, 5,000 miles. Every 2 or 3 oil changes, I'll pull the cover off and check the valve clearance. It's not that hard to do. You do it real quickly. It takes 5 minutes if you're taking your time to do the whole process. Why not? Just be on the safe side. And generally, I might even find once in a while, I'll find a valve that's gotten a little tight, adjust it, and you're good to go. Just something you had to do back in the day with engines. You had to actually maintain your cars. They weren't like buying a refrigerator that just runs for 10 years and you don't have to do anything. You have to actually do a lot of maintenance on this era and earlier engines. Anyway, that's it for now. Just a little informative video. Hi, Big Daddy. I want to give a shout out to my dad. I didn't do that on my last one, and I think he missed it. So, hey, Big Dad. We'll come back to this later, and I'll set up the tripod and we'll do some work. Thanks for watching. Bye.